Poor girl gave her water to an exhausted worker, not knowing he owned the construction company. Emily Johnson walked past the construction site in Hope Village every day, carrying her only bottle of cold water that her grandmother Margaret prepared for her to take to school. The 8-year-old girl had light blonde hair and always wore the same beige dress, faded from so much use, but always clean and well cared for by her grandmother. On that Tuesday in March, the sun beat down on Miami with such intensity that even the dogs sought shade. Emily stopped at the entrance to the site when she saw a man in an orange vest leaning against a wall, panting and red-faced from the heat. Sweat dripped down his bearded face as he tried to catch his breath. "Sir, are you feeling sick?" Emily asked, approaching carefully. The man looked up and saw the small girl in a simple dress, holding a water bottle. He was Richard Wilson, 42 years old, but at that moment he looked like just another exhausted worker. "I'm fine, little one. Just the heat," he replied, trying to hide how unwell he felt. Emily looked at her water bottle, then at the man, and without hesitation she held it out. "You can drink. Grandma always says sharing is multiplying." Richard was surprised by the gesture. It had been years since anyone had offered him something without expecting anything in return. He tried to refuse, but Emily insisted. "I can drink water at school. You need it more than I do right now." He accepted the bottle and took a few sips, feeling the cool water soothe his parched throat. When he tried to return the rest, Emily shook her head. "You can drink it all. I won't lie to Grandma. I'll tell her I gave it to a man who was thirsty." At that moment, Richard didn't know he was standing before one of the purest souls he'd ever met. He was the owner of Wilson & Sons Construction, one of the largest companies in the Southeast, but he had decided to work disguised as a laborer to understand the real problems on his sites. Emily waved goodbye and headed to school, unaware of the impact her kindness had made. Richard watched her walk away, feeling something strange in his chest. It had been so long since he'd seen selfless kindness. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Over the next few days, Richard looked for Emily every morning. She always passed the site at the same time, 7:30 a.m., on her way to school. He noticed she carried the same small bottle every day, and that her dress, though clean, showed signs of heavy wear. That Friday, Emily stopped at the site entrance again. This time, she brought 2 bottles. "I brought one for each of us today," she said, offering one to Richard. "You didn't have to, little one. You can keep your water," Grandma insisted. She said those who help always receive twice as much. Richard accepted the bottle but was curious about the girl's family. "Does your grandmother live with you?" "Yes, just the 2 of us. Mom and Dad left when I was really little, but Grandma takes good care of me." The simplicity with which Emily spoke about her situation touched Richard's heart. Despite her hardships, the girl radiated genuine joy. "And what does your grandmother do?" "She used to do embroidery to sell, but she can't anymore. Her fingers hurt a lot. The doctor said it's arthritis, so I help by selling candy at school." Richard's chest tightened. An 8-year-old selling sweets to help at home, yet still sharing her water with a stranger. "How old are you, Emily?" 8. I'll be 9 in June." "And you, sir? What's your name?" Richard hesitated for a moment. "You can call me Old Richard." "Old Richard, do you like working here?" "I do. So I'm learning a lot of important things." Emily smiled and said goodbye again. Richard watched her walk down the uneven cobblestone street, dodging potholes with the agility of someone who knew every stone on the path. That afternoon, Richard asked his supervisor, Frank Thompson, to show him the employee records. He wanted to better understand the dynamics of the construction site, but his mind was preoccupied with thoughts of Emily. "Frank, do you know a girl who walks by here every morning? Blonde, wearing a beige dress?" "Ah, little Emily. Everyone here knows her. Poor thing, she's in a tough spot. Her grandmother, Mrs. Margaret, is a hard-working woman, but she's having health problems." "What kind of problems?" "Arthritis in her hands, high blood pressure, just age-related things. She used to do some sewing work, but she can't anymore. They're really struggling financially." Richard absorbed this information in silence. He had grown up in a wealthy family, never experiencing basic needs, but now he was seeing firsthand how ordinary people faced daily hardships with dignity and generosity. The following week, Emily didn't show up on Monday. Richard grew worried and asked the other workers if anyone had seen her. "The girl didn't come by today, old Richard," said Anthony, an experienced mason. "Strange, because she's usually as punctual as clockwork." By Tuesday, she still hadn't appeared. Richard was genuinely concerned. On Wednesday, he decided to look for her. "Frank, do you know where Emily lives?" "I do. On Blossom Street, number 47. It's that little house with the peeling blue gate. But why the interest?" "She gave me water a few days ago. I want to return the kindness." Richard left the construction site early and went to Emily's house. The street was narrow, lined with small, simple homes pressed close together. Number 47 was tiny, but had a well-kept little garden out front. He knocked on the gate and a grey-haired woman appeared at the door. It was Margaret Johnson, 68 years old, a thin woman with a dignified posture despite her plain clothes. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Are you Emily's grandmother?" "I am. And you are?" "My name is Richard. I work at the construction site your granddaughter usually passes by. She hasn't come by the last few days, and I got worried." Margaret studied Richard carefully. Her experienced eyes noticed his calloused hands, but also sensed something different about him that she couldn't quite place. "Emily's had a fever for 3 days. I didn't want her leaving the house. Is there anything I can do to help? She's always been very kind to me." "No need, young man, we manage." But Richard heard the hesitation in Margaret's voice and pressed gently. "Ma'am, your granddaughter gave me water when I wasn't feeling well. It's the least I can do." Margaret sighed and invited Richard inside. The house was very simple. A small living room with an old but clean sofa, a coffee table and a few plants. Family photos hung on the wall in cheap frames, arranged with care. "Emily's lying down. The fever won't go away." Richard saw the girl lying on a mattress on the floor, covered with a thin sheet. She was pale and breathing heavily. "Has she seen a doctor?" "I took her to the clinic, but they only gave her basic medicine. Said it was just a virus, but she's not getting better." Richard took in the situation, his chest tightening. The house had no air conditioning, just an old, noisy fan. There were no signs of proper medication or medical care. "Mrs. Margaret, may I suggest she see a private doctor? I know some good professionals." "Young man, thank you for your concern, but we can't afford a private doctor." "I'll pay. Consider this a favor I'm returning." Margaret fell silent for a moment, torn between pride and concern for her granddaughter. "Why would you do this for us?" "Because your granddaughter taught me there's still kindness in the world, and because every child deserves proper medical care." After much insistence, Margaret accepted the help. Richard called Dr. Henry Stone, a renowned pediatrician who occasionally worked for his company. Dr. Stone arrived within an hour and examined Emily carefully. After the checkup, he called Richard and Margaret aside to speak in the living room. "The girl has a respiratory infection. It's not serious, but she needs specific antibiotics and some care. I'll prescribe the medication." "Doctor, how much will the visit cost?" asked Margaret, nervously fidgeting with her hands. "Don't worry about that, ma'am. It's all taken care of," replied Dr. Stone, glancing at Richard. After the doctor left, Richard went to the pharmacy to buy all the prescribed medicines. When he returned, he found Margaret sitting beside Emily, who was awake and feeling slightly better. "Mr. Richard?" Emily said weakly but with a smile. "Grandma told me you brought the doctor. How are you feeling, little one?" "Better, and thank you so much. When I'm all better, I'll bring double water for us." Richard smiled, but his heart ached. He realized he was growing emotionally attached to this family, something that hadn't happened in years. Over the next few days, Richard visited Emily every evening after work. He brought fruits, fresh juices, and always asked if she needed anything. At first, Margaret resisted such kindness, but she gradually grew accustomed to his visits. Emily fully recovered within a week. The following Monday, she appeared at the construction site with 2 bottles of cold water and a radiant smile. "Mr. Richard, I brought water for us to celebrate." "It's so good to see you well, Emily. I missed our morning chats." "Me too. Grandma said you're really good. She's never seen anyone help us like this before." Richard was moved but also confused by his own feelings. He had never formed bonds with people from different social classes, yet now he genuinely cared about Emily and Margaret's well-being. That afternoon, Frank approached Richard looking agitated. "Mr. Richard, I need to talk to you about something important." "What is it, Frank?" "It's about Emily's family. I found out something you should know." A chill ran down Richard's spine. "Go on." "The house they live in, it's going to be demolished. The whole street will make way for a new development. The families have already been notified, but many have nowhere to go." "What development?" "An affordable housing complex. It's actually our company's project, Wilson and Sons Construction." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. His own project would displace the family he'd grown to love. The irony was cruel. He was living disguised as a worker, forming genuine connections, while his business decisions threatened to uproot these people's lives. "When was this project approved?" "About 6 months ago." "You didn't know?" "I thought all employees had been informed." Richard lied, saying he wasn't aware of the details. His mind raced, searching for a solution that wouldn't reveal his true identity. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He thought of Emily and Margaret losing their only home, forced to move somewhere uncertain, far from everything they knew. The next morning, Emily showed up at the construction site as usual, but Richard could barely hold a normal conversation with her. The girl noticed he seemed different. "Mr. Wilson, are you sad?" "No, little one. Just thinking about some work things. Grandma always says that when we share our problems, they get smaller. Do you want to talk about it?" Richard looked at this 8-year-old offering life wisdom and felt like crying. How could she possibly help him with a problem he had created himself? "It's complicated, Emily. Sometimes adults make decisions that end up hurting people without meaning to. Then you just fix it, right? When I break something, Grandma teaches me how to make it better." The simplicity of Emily's childlike logic made Richard reflect. Maybe there was a way to fix the situation without revealing who he really was. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. That afternoon, Richard called his private lawyer, Dr. Paul Mitchell, from a public phone far from the construction site. "Paul, I need information about a demolition project in Hope Village." "Richard, what project is this? Are you talking about the affordable housing construction on Blossom Street?" "Exactly that one. I want to know all the legal options to stop or modify the project." "Richard, this is one of our most profitable projects this year. Why would you want to stop it?" "I have my reasons. Just tell me what the possibilities are." Dr. Paul explained that the project was already far along legally, but modifications might still be possible with valid technical or social justifications. One option would be to relocate the families into units within the same development as a company-sponsored social initiative. How much would that cost? Significant, but not impossible. Maybe about 20% less profit on the project. Richard thanked him and hung up. He had an idea, but he needed to be very careful not to reveal his identity. The following week, Richard began observing more closely the routines of the families who would be affected by the demolition. He realized Margaret wasn't the only elderly person on the street who relied on neighborhood relationships to survive. Mrs. Martha, 73, was raising 3 orphaned grandchildren. Old Anthony, an 80-year-old widower, depended on his neighbors for basic tasks. Blossom Street was a small community where everyone knew and helped each other. Richard realized the demolition project wouldn't just affect houses, it would destroy a social support network that had developed over decades. This discovery made him question many of the decisions he'd made as a businessman. One day, Emily arrived at the site quieter than usual. "Emily, are you okay?" "Mr. Wilson, Grandma was crying yesterday. She thought I didn't see, but I did." "Why was she crying?" "We got a paper at our house saying we have to leave. But Grandma doesn't want to go. She was born in that house. Richard felt a lump in his throat. Margaret had been born in the house that was set to be demolished. The situation was even more complicated than he'd imagined. What are you going to do? I don't know. Grandma said we'll figure it out like we always do, but I can tell she's scared. At that moment, Richard made a decision. He would find a way to save not just Emily and Margaret's home, but the entire Blossom Street community, even if it meant revealing his true identity. That Friday, Richard called an urgent meeting with the board of Wilson & Sons Construction. He knew he'd have to drop his disguise as a laborer and return as the company's CEO. The meeting took place Saturday morning in the conference room of the construction firm's main office. Present were Richard, his partner Edward Wilson, his cousin, the architect in charge of the project Fiona Shores, and the lead engineer Robert Woods. Everyone, I called this meeting to discuss the Blossom Street project, Richard began. Is there a problem, Richard? Asked Edward. The project is on schedule and within budget. The problem is social. I've been studying the impact of the demolition on the local community, and I believe we need to change our approach. Fiona spoke up. Richard, we've done all the necessary impact studies. We've met every legal requirement. I know that, Fiona, but meeting legal requirements doesn't mean we're doing the right thing from a human perspective. Edward looked at his cousin in surprise. Richard had always been known for his business-like coldness and exclusive focus on financial results. What exactly are you proposing? I propose we turn the project into a model for community housing. Instead of demolishing all the homes, we'll renovate some and build affordable apartments to relocate the families in the same area. Richard, this will significantly reduce our profit margin, Robert warned. I'm aware of that, but I believe the return in company image and social responsibility will make up for the reduced profit. The meeting lasted 3 hours, with much discussion about technical and financial feasibility. In the end, Richard managed to convince the team to at least study the possibility of modifying the project. The following Monday, Richard returned to the construction site as a worker, but now with a specific mission: to gather detailed information about each family on Blossom Street to present a solid proposal to the board. Emily appeared as usual, but Richard noticed she was even quieter than before. Emily, is something wrong? Grandma had to sell her sewing machine. It was the only valuable thing we had. Why? To pay the lawyer's fee. Grandma said she has to try to stop the demolition in court, even though she knows we won't succeed. Richard felt a mix of admiration for Margaret's determination and guilt for being indirectly responsible for their suffering. Emily, can I ask you something? Has your grandmother talked to other families on the street about this situation? Yes, she has. Everyone's worried. Mrs. Martha said she doesn't know how she'll take care of her grandkids if she has to leave. And old Anthony is really sad because he said he's too old to start over somewhere else. This confirmed for Richard that he was making the right decision. That afternoon, he sought out Margaret for a more serious conversation. Mrs. Margaret, may I speak with you for a moment? Of course, Mr. Richard. Come in. Richard entered the modest home and got straight to the point. Ma'am, I heard you're trying to stop the demolition in court. Margaret sighed deeply. We're trying, but the lawyer was very clear. Our chances are slim. The construction company has all the proper documentation. What if I told you there might be another solution? What kind of solution? Richard chose his words carefully. I know some people who work in the management of large companies. Maybe I can present your situation to someone with decision-making power. Margaret looked at Richard with an expression mixing hope and skepticism. Mr. Richard, you're too good to us. But this construction company is huge. I doubt anyone will care about a handful of poor families. Would you allow me to try? I would, but I don't want you to get in trouble for our sake. You've already done so much. That night, Richard worked late preparing a detailed proposal for modifying the project. It included financial analyses, social impact studies, and even projections of positive marketing returns for the company. On Wednesday, he presented the proposal to the board. The initial reaction was resistance, but when Richard showed the detailed numbers and the possibilities of turning the project into a successful case study in social responsibility, The team began to show interest. "Richard, the proposal is interesting, but we need investor approval," said Edward. "I've already thought about that. We can present it as a pilot project for sustainable housing. If it works, we can replicate the model in other developments." Fiona was examining the technical drawings. "From an architectural standpoint, it's feasible. It would be a unique project in the region." "And the timeline?" asked Robert. "It would add about 6 months to the original project, but the final result would be much more impactful." After another week of analysis and studies, the board approved the project modification. Richard knew he now needed to find a way to share the good news without revealing his role in the process. The following Friday, Frank received a call from the company's headquarters with instructions to gather all the workers at the site for an important announcement. "Everyone, we've received an order from the company's board. The Blossom Street project will be modified. Instead of demolishing all the houses, we'll create a community housing project, preserving some of the old homes and building apartments to relocate the families in the same area." The workers were surprised. Many knew the families on the street and were aware of the hardships they were facing. "Does this mean the families won't have to leave?" asked Anthony. "Exactly. The company will provide new apartments for all registered families at no additional cost." Richard masked his satisfaction, but inside he was celebrating. He had managed to save the community without revealing his identity. The following Monday, Emily arrived at the site, beaming with joy. Mr. Richard, Grandma is so happy she even danced in the kitchen." "What happened, Emily?" "We got a letter from the construction company saying we'll get a new apartment on the same street, and all the families get to stay. Grandma said it's a miracle." Richard smiled, feeling a satisfaction he had never experienced in any previous business deal. "What wonderful news, Emily. Your grandmother must be so relieved." "She said she wants to meet the boss of this construction company to thank him in person. She said he must be a very good person to do something like this." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. If Margaret knew he was the boss she wanted to thank, how would she react? Would she still see him with the same warmth? Over the following weeks, the construction site was modified to accommodate the new project. Richard continued working as a laborer, but now with a different feeling. He was genuinely proud of the work he was doing. Emily kept showing up every day with her water bottles, but now she brought stories of how the whole street was preparing for the changes. The families had organized themselves to decide who would stay in the renovated houses and who would move into the new apartments. "Grandma chose to stay in our little house," Emily shared. "She said she was born there and wants to stay, but Mrs. Martha is moving to an apartment because it'll be easier for her grandkids. And are you all excited?" "So much. Grandma will be able to sew again because they're fixing up a special little room for her to work in, and I'll have my own little bedroom." Richard was pleased to hear that the project details were meeting each family's specific needs. Fiona and her team had done an excellent job adapting the project to the community's requests. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. A month later, the renovation work began on the houses that would remain. Richard worked personally on the renovations for Emily and Margaret's home, ensuring every detail was perfect. Margaret watched the work with admiration. "Mr. Wilson, you work with such care. I've never seen a builder so meticulous. When the work is important, it's worth doing it right, Mrs. Margaret." "Do you have children?" The question caught Richard off guard. He had never married, always focused solely on his company. "No, Mom." "What a shame. You'd be a wonderful father. Emily talks about you all the time. She says she wants to introduce you to all her friends when she goes back to school." Richard was moved by the comment, but also worried. The closer he grew to Emily and Margaret, the harder it would be to maintain his disguise. During the renovations, Richard learned details about the Johnson family's history. Margaret showed him old photos of the house from her childhood. The family had lived there for 3 generations. Margaret's late husband, John Johnson, had been a builder and had made several improvements to the house with his own hands. "My John used to say a home isn't just made of bricks and cement, but of memories and love," Margaret shared, showing him a photo of her husband. "He was a builder too." "Yes, he was. worked in construction his whole life. He dreamed of having his own company, but never managed to save enough money. Richard fell silent, absorbing that information. John Johnson had the same dream he had achieved, but without the same opportunities. What was life like for you? Hard, but happy. John always said wealth isn't measured by what's in the bank, but by what's in the heart. Those words echoed in Richard's mind for days. He began questioning his own definitions of success and happiness. 2 weeks later, an event occurred that would change everything. Richard was working on Margaret's roof when he slipped and fell, hitting his head on a wooden beam. He passed out instantly. Margaret and Emily heard the noise and rushed to help. Margaret, who had cared for her builder husband for years, knew exactly what to do in construction emergencies. "Emily, run and get Frank, and have someone call the EMT." When Richard regained consciousness, he was lying on Margaret's couch with a bandage on his head. Emily was holding his hand, tears in her eyes. "Mr. Wilson, are you okay? I was so scared." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a bump." Margaret approached with a glass of water. "The EMT doctor said you need to rest for a few hours. You're welcome to stay here if you'd like." "No need to trouble yourself, Mrs. Margaret. I can go home." "Nonsense. You took care of us when we needed it. Now it's our turn to take care of you." Richard stayed under observation at Margaret's house for the rest of the day. Emily never left his side, telling him stories about school and showing him her drawings. Margaret made chicken soup and insisted he eat every bit. That afternoon, Richard experienced something he never had before, the genuine care of a family. There was no financial interest, no expectations beyond seeing him well. It was pure, simple love. That evening, when Richard was feeling better, Margaret sat beside him to talk. "Mr. Wilson, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Mrs. Margaret." "Do you have family? Someone to take care of you when you need it?" Richard hesitated before answering. "No, ma'am. I've always been alone." "How sad. Everyone needs someone." "You and Emily are the closest thing I have to family." Margaret smiled and touched Richard's hand affectionately. "Then we're adopting you. From today on, you're part of our family." At that moment, Richard felt tears in his eyes. At 42, he finally understood what it meant to have a real family. The following week, Richard returned to work, but now his motivation was different. He wasn't just renovating a house, he was caring for his adoptive family's home. The Blossom Street project began gaining visibility in the local media. Journalists came to cover the innovative initiative by Wilson and Sons Construction. Richard hid whenever cameras arrived, maintaining his disguise. During one interview, Margaret was asked what she thought of the construction company. "That company has some very good people working there. I met one employee, Mr. Richard, who's a wonderful person. He proves there's still kindness in the world." Richard watched the report on Margaret's TV and was moved by her words. 2 months later, the renovations were nearly complete. Margaret and Emily's house had been transformed while keeping its original charm. Emily's room now had a large window overlooking a small garden Richard had created just for her. "Mr. Richard, how did you know I wanted a garden?" Emily asked, admiring the flowers he'd planted. "Everyone deserves a beautiful place to look at when they wake up in the morning. When I grow up, I'll plant flowers just like you, and I'll be here to teach you." But Richard knew that promise might not be kept. Soon, the project would be finished, and he'd have to return to his real life as the company's CEO. How would he explain his disappearance to Emily and Margaret? During the official inauguration week, Richard faced a dilemma. The company's board expected him to appear publicly to receive credit for the innovative project, but that would mean revealing his true identity to Margaret and Emily. He decided to talk to Edward about the situation. "Edward, I need to tell you something. These past months, I've been working undercover as a laborer at the Blossom Street site." "Undercover? What do you mean?" Richard shared the whole story, from the day he met Emily to his decision to modify the project. Edward listened silently, his expressions shifting between surprise and admiration. "Richard, this is unbelievable. You've always been so business-minded. I never thought you'd change this much." "Neither did I. But living with these people taught me things no business school ever could. So now what? Are you going to tell them who you are? I don't know. I'm afraid of how they'll react. What if they think I was dishonest with them? Richard, from what you've told me, these people love you for who you are, not what you have. I think they'll understand. On Inauguration Day, local officials, company representatives, and Blossom Street residents gathered to celebrate the project's completion. Richard stood dressed as a laborer in the crowd, watching everything. The mayor gave a speech praising Wilson & Sons Construction's initiative. Edward represented the company, mentioning the project was inspired by our employees' commitment to the local community. Margaret stood in the front row, holding Emily's hand. Both were emotional, seeing their renovated homes and the whole neighborhood celebrating. After the ceremony, a community party was held. Richard approached Margaret and Emily to say goodbye. "Mrs. Margaret, Emily, I need to talk to you." "What is it, Mr. Richard?" Margaret asked, noticing the seriousness in his tone. "I'm being transferred to another project. I won't be working here on your street anymore." Emily started to cry. "But why? Don't you like us anymore?" "It's not that, little one. I care about you very much. But sometimes life forces us to make changes." Margaret hugged Richard. "You'll always be part of our family, no matter where you are. And I'll come back to visit whenever I can." That night, Richard returned to his real home, an empty mansion in the city's upscale neighborhood. For the first time in months, he felt lonely and out of place. The luxurious house seemed cold compared to the warmth of Margaret and Emily's simple little home. In the following weeks, Richard tried to return to his normal business routine, but he couldn't focus. His meetings felt meaningless, his profits felt hollow. All he could think about was Emily asking when he would come back to visit. A month after the inauguration, Richard couldn't bear the longing anymore and decided to visit Blossom Street. He arrived just as Emily was coming home from school. The girl spotted him from afar and ran to hug him. "Mr. Wilson, I knew you'd come back." "How are you, little one?" "Great. The new school is wonderful and I've made lots of new friends, and Grandma is so happy with the fixed-up house." Richard talked with Emily for a few minutes, but noticed something was different. The girl seemed more independent, more confident. She had adapted well to the changes and was building a new life. When Margaret arrived home, she was surprised and happy to see Richard. "What a joy, Mr. Wilson. How are you?" "I'm well, Mrs. Margaret. I came to see how you're adjusting." "We're doing great. The house is marvelous, and Emily loves her new school. You were part of a miracle in our lives." Richard realized Margaret and Emily had moved forward with their lives. They didn't need him the same way they once had. That left him both proud and melancholy. That night, Richard made an important decision. He wrote a letter telling Margaret and Emily the whole truth. In it, he explained who he really was, why he had disguised himself as a worker, and how meeting them had changed his life forever. The next day, Richard returned to Blossom Street and left the letter with Frank, asking him to deliver it to Margaret. 3 days later, Richard received a call from Margaret. "Mr. Wilson, it's Margaret." "Mrs. Margaret, did you get my letter?" "Yes, I did. Can I talk to you?" "Of course. Are you angry with me?" "I'm not angry. I'm confused, but not angry. Can you come over tonight?" Richard arrived at Margaret's house at 7 in the evening, nervous and anxious. Emily was in the living room doing her homework. She looked at Richard with a serious expression he'd never seen before. "Hi, Mr. Wilson. Grandma told me who you really are." "Emily, I can explain. You're the owner of the company that wanted to tear down our house." "Yes, but... and you changed your mind because of us." "I did." Emily fell silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "So you're like a superhero in disguise." Richard laughed, relieved by her reaction. Margaret sat beside Richard on the couch. "Mr. Wilson, or rather Mr. Johnson, I need to understand one thing. Why did you disguise yourself?" Richard told the whole story, from his decision to work as a laborer to the moment he met Emily, and how it had transformed his perspective on everything. "Mrs. Margaret, when Emily offered me that water, she didn't know who I was. It was a pure gesture, without any ulterior motive. That made me realize I'd lost touch with what truly matters in life." "And what truly matters?" "Genuine relationships, taking care of one another, making a difference in people's lives. These are the things you taught me." Margaret fell silent for a long moment. "Mr. Wilson, I won't lie. I was shocked when I read your letter. But thinking about it, you never lied about who you are inside. The man I met, who took care of us, who saved our community, that man is real, no matter what your name or bank account says. Will you forgive me for hiding my identity?" "I forgive you, but on one condition." "What is it?" "That you keep being the Mr. Wilson we know. I don't want money to change who you are." Emily stepped closer and took Richard's hand. "Mr. Wilson, will you still be part of our family?" "If you'll have me, I always will be." "Then it's settled. But can I tell my friends now that my adoptive uncle owns a company?" Richard laughed and hugged Emily. "You sure can, kiddo." In the months that followed, Richard maintained a close relationship with Margaret and Emily, now fully transparent about who he was. He visited regularly, always bringing small gifts and joining in family activities. The experience of living with Margaret and Emily also transformed how Richard ran his business. He implemented new social programs at the company, created a fund to help employees facing financial hardships, and began considering the social impact of all his construction firm's projects. The Blossom Street project became a national model for responsible social housing. Richard was invited to speak at universities and business events, always sharing the story of how an 8-year-old girl taught him the true meaning of success. A year after the project's completion, Wilson & Sons Construction launched the Emily Johnson Social Housing Program, bringing the Blossom Street model to communities across the country. During the program's launch ceremony, Emily was invited on stage with Richard. She wore a new dress but kept the same simplicity and sincerity as always. "Emily, can you tell the audience how it all began?" the host asked. "It started when I saw Mr. Wilson thirsty and decided to share my water with him. Grandma always said that when we share, we multiply, and that's what happened. The water I shared multiplied into new homes for everyone on my street." The audience was moved by the simplicity and wisdom of Emily's answer. Richard stepped up to the microphone. "Emily taught me that true leadership isn't about having power over people, but using our power to serve them. Now every project our company takes on starts with one simple question. Will this make a positive difference in someone's life?" After the ceremony, Richard, Margaret and Emily went to dinner at an elegant restaurant. Emily was amazed by the luxurious setting. "Mr. Wilson, do you always eat in places like this?" "I used to, but now I'd rather have dinner at your place. Food made with love always tastes better." Margaret smiled. "You're welcome at our table any time. Our door is always open to family." 2 years later, Emily was 10 and had become one of the top students in her school. Richard paid for her education at a quality private school, but always reminded her to stay true to her values and never forget where she came from. During one visit, Emily showed Richard an essay she'd written for school titled "My Hero." "Read it, Mr. Wilson," Richard read aloud. "My hero doesn't wear a cape or have superpowers, but he has something better, a good heart. My hero is Mr. Hero Wilson, who saved my street and my family. But the most important thing is that he taught me anyone can be a hero. You just have to choose to do good. When I grow up, I want to be just like him, to use everything I have to help others." Richard finished reading with tears in his eyes. "Emily, you're already my hero. You're the one who saved me, not the other way around." "How so?" "Before I met you, I had a lot of money, but I didn't have a family. I didn't have joy. You gave me the most important thing in the world, true love." Margaret, who had been listening to the conversation, stepped closer. "Mr. Wilson, you changed our lives, but I think we changed yours too." "You changed it completely, Mrs. Margaret. Now I know my greatest wealth isn't in the bank, it's right here in this house with all of you." On the 3rd anniversary of the Blossom Street project, the community organized a big celebration. Every family gathered to celebrate not just the physical improvements, but also the bonds that had grown stronger over time. Richard arrived at the party not as the CEO of the construction company, but as Mr. Wilson, the beloved member of the Johnson family. He helped Margaret prepare the food and played with the neighborhood kids. During the party, Mrs. Martha approached Richard. "Mr. Wilson, can I tell you something?" "Of course, Mrs. Martha." When I found out you owned the company, I was afraid you'd change around us, but you stayed the same kind person you've always been. Mrs. Martha, I've learned that true wealth is having people who care about you, no matter if you're rich or poor. You've learned well, and we consider you part of our big family here on the street. At the end of the party, Richard sat with Emily on a bench they'd placed in the small garden he had made for her. Emily, can I tell you a secret? Go ahead. You know that day you first gave me water? I do. I was about to give up on everything. I was tired, sad, hopeless. Your kindness gave me the strength to keep going. Really? Really? You saved my life that day. Emily fell silent for a moment, taking it in. So, we saved each other. Exactly. That's so beautiful, just like in the movies Grandma loves to watch. Richard laughed and hugged Emily, even better than the movies, because this is real. 5 years after Richard and Emily first met, Wilson & Sons Construction had become a national leader in social projects. The Blossom Street model had been replicated in 15 different cities, always with the active participation of local communities. Emily, now 13, had grown into a smart and determined young woman. She actively participated in the company's social projects, always consulting on issues related to children's needs. At a board meeting, Richard presented the results of 5 years of social projects. Everyone, our social initiatives haven't just transformed hundreds of families' lives, they've also significantly boosted the company's credibility and profitability. Now, clients who value social responsibility seek us out. Edward commented, Richard, 5 years ago, I had doubts about this shift in the company's direction. Now I see it was the best decision we ever made. I've learned that doing well and doing good aren't opposites. In fact, they go hand in hand. After the meeting, Richard went to visit Margaret and Emily, as he did every Friday. Margaret, now 73, was more active than ever. She ran a sewing group that supplied products for the company's social store. Mr. Wilson, I have some news, Margaret said with a mysterious smile. What's the news? Emily was selected for a Young Talents program at the State University. She'll be able to study business administration and then intern at your company. Richard was moved. Emily, is this true? Yes. And do you know what I specifically want to study? Social project management. I want to learn how to create more projects like the one on our street. You'll be an excellent administrator, but promise me you'll never forget where you came from. I promise. Grandma always reminds me that our roots are our strength. That night, Richard reflected on the incredible journey he had lived over the past 5 years. He had started as a successful but emotionally empty businessman, and now he had a family, a purpose, and a company that truly made a difference in the world. 6 months later, Emily began her college studies. On her first day of class, she wrote a letter to Richard. Mr. Wilson, today I started college, and I thought about everything that's happened since the day I shared my water with you. The professor asked why we chose our major, and I told our story. The whole class was moved. I want you to know that everything I've learned about kindness, determination, and never giving up on dreams, I learned by watching you. You showed me that we can use our talents to make the world better. I promise to study hard so I can help more families like ours. And I want you to know that to me, you'll always be the Mr. Wilson I met at the construction site who accepted my water and changed my life forever. With much love and gratitude, Emily's Richard kept that letter like a treasure. It represented not just Emily's growth, but also his own transformation as a person. 2 years later, when Emily was in her 3rd semester, she approached Richard with a proposal. Mr. Wilson, I want to present a project for the company. What kind of project? A financial education program for children in underserved communities, teaching them from an early age how to manage money, save, and plan for the future. Tell me more. Emily presented a complete project with methodology, timeline, and budget. Richard was impressed by the quality and depth of the proposal. Emily, this project is excellent. I'll present it to the board next week. Really? Do you think they'll approve it? I'm sure of it. Plus, I want you to personally oversee the project. Emily's financial education project was unanimously approved by the board. In the following months, she developed an innovative program that used games and playful activities to teach basic financial concepts to children aged 6 to 12. The first pilot was implemented right on Blossom Street. Emily taught children in the same place where she had grown up, using her own story as an example of how education can transform lives. During one of the lessons, an 8-year-old girl asked Emily, "Aunt Emily, why is saving money important?" "Because when we save, we gain the freedom to help others and achieve our dreams. But remember, money is important, but it's not the most important thing in life." "Then what is the most important?" "Love, family, friendship. Those are the things that make life worthwhile." Richard watched the lesson from afar, proud to see how Emily had become a wise young woman committed to others' well-being. By the end of the year, the financial education program had been implemented in 10 different communities, benefiting over 500 children. Emily had become a reference on the subject, invited to speak at schools and educational events. At one of these talks, a journalist asked Emily what her main inspiration had been for creating the project. "My inspiration came from a lesson I learned when I was 8 years old. When we share what we have, we multiply the good in the world. My goal is to teach children that they can be the protagonists of their own stories and still help others." After the talk, Richard approached Emily. "I'm so proud of you, Emily. Mr. Wilson, everything I do is inspired by the example you set for me. You showed me that true success is when our victory lifts others up too. You've exceeded my expectations, Emily. In fact, you've even surpassed your own childhood dreams." "No, Mr. Wilson. I've fulfilled exactly the dream I had as a child, to make a difference in people's lives. I just didn't know it would be through financial education." At that moment, Richard realized he had witnessed something extraordinary. A girl who had received love and opportunities and was now dedicating her life to multiplying those blessings for other children. 7 years after their first meeting, Richard organized a special celebration on Blossom Street to honor the results of all the social projects developed by the company. Authorities, business leaders, NGO representatives, and most importantly, all the families who had benefited were present. During the event, Richard was invited to give a speech. He stepped onto a small makeshift stage and looked at the crowd, spotting Margaret and Emily in the front row. "Friends, 7 years ago I met an 8-year-old girl who completely changed my life. Emily Johnson offered me a simple glass of water on a hot day, but in truth, she gave me so much more. She taught me the meaning of true generosity." The audience applauded and Emily smiled tearfully. "Today, our company has implemented social projects in 20 cities, directly benefiting over 2,000 families. But the most important thing isn't the numbers. The most important thing is that every project was developed with love, respect, and genuine concern for people's well-being." Richard paused and looked directly at Emily. "Emily, you planted a seed of kindness in my heart that day. Today I see that seed growing into a forest of hope spreading across the country." After the speech, Margaret approached Richard with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Wilson, my John would be so proud if he could see all this. He always said the world changes when good people come together to do good. Mrs. Margaret, your John is present in all of this through the upbringing you gave Emily. The values she carries come from you. And the love she has for life comes from the opportunities you provided." That night, after all the guests had left, Richard, Margaret, and Emily sat on the porch of the renovated house, gazing at the transformed street. "Mr. Wilson," Emily said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you regret anything after all these years?" Richard thought for a moment. "I regret only one thing, that it took me so long to understand that true wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we share." "And I regret something too," Emily said. "What's that?" "That I didn't bring 2 bottles of water that first day, to make sure you drank enough." The three of them laughed together, and Richard felt a deep peace in his heart. He had found his family, his purpose, and his true identity. 10 years after their first meeting, Emily graduated with a degree in business administration, specializing in social project management. Her thesis was on the impact of individual generosity on social transformation. using the projects developed by Wilson & Sons Construction as a case study. On graduation day, Richard sat in the audience alongside Margaret, now 78, but still very active. When Emily stepped onto the stage to receive her diploma, she scanned the crowd for the two of them and waved emotionally. After the ceremony, the three gathered for an intimate celebration at the house on Blossom Street. "Emily, what do you plan to do now that you've graduated?" asked Richard. "I want to keep working on social projects, but I have a specific dream." "What is it?" "To create a foundation that brings our project model to other countries in Latin America. I want children in Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia to have the same opportunities I had." Richard was surprised by the breadth of Emily's vision. "That's an ambitious project. Have you thought about how to fund it?" "Actually, I have a proposal for you." "What proposal?" "What if we created this foundation together? You with your business expertise and me with my passion for social projects." Richard looked at Margaret, who smiled and nodded in approval. "Emily, it would be an honor to be your partner in this." And so, 10 years after a simple act of kindness, Richard and Emily began planning an international foundation that would bring hope and opportunities to vulnerable children across Latin America. The Margaret Johnson Foundation, named in honor of the family matriarch, was officially established a year later. The first project was implemented in an underserved community in Lima, Peru, following the exact model of Blossom Street. On the day of the first international project's inauguration, Richard made sure to bring a special water bottle, the same one Emily had used on the day they met, now framed as the foundation's symbol. "Emily, this bottle represents the beginning of everything. I want it to be the official symbol of our foundation." "Perfect, Mr. Wilson. It will always remind us that great change starts with small acts of love." 15 years after their first meeting, the Margaret Johnson Foundation had implemented projects in 12 countries directly benefiting over 10,000 families. Emily had become an international leader in social development, invited to speak at the UN and prestigious universities worldwide. Margaret, now 83, remained the family's wise counselor. She followed all the foundation's projects and always offered valuable insights based on her life experience. One Sunday afternoon, the three were gathered at the house on Blossom Street, planning the foundation's next project. "Mr. Wilson," Margaret said, "can I tell you something I've never shared before?" "Of course, Mrs. Margaret." "That first day, when Emily came home and told me she'd given water to a worker, I was worried. I thought she was being too naive." "What changed your mind?" "The next day, she insisted on taking 2 bottles. She said she wanted to make sure the young man wouldn't go thirsty again. That's when I realized it wasn't naivety, it was pure kindness." Emily smiled. "Grandma, you always taught me that kindness is never a mistake." And I was right. The kindness of you two didn't just change my life, it changed thousands of others, Richard added. At that moment, Richard reflected on the extraordinary journey he'd lived. He had started as a lonely, financially successful but emotionally empty businessman. Now, at 57, he had a beloved family, a meaningful social legacy, and the certainty that his life had made a difference in the world. Emily, at 23, had become a brilliant and committed young woman with a clear vision of her role in social transformation. She carried with her the values taught by Margaret and the opportunities provided by Richard, creating a powerful blend of grassroots wisdom and technical expertise. Margaret, the family matriarch, had witnessed her granddaughter's transformation from a vulnerable child into an internationally respected social leader, while also seeing her own life stabilize and flourish with genuine relationships. On the 20th anniversary of Blossom Street, now officially called Hope Street, the community organized a grand celebration. Children born after the transformation played in the garden Richard had created for Emily. Families who had moved into the apartments built by the initial project now watched their children grow up with opportunities they had never dreamed of. During the party, a 6-year-old child approached Emily. "Aunt Emily, is it true you saved our street?" "No, sweetheart. What saved our street was love. I just offered a glass of water to someone who was thirsty." "And that's how all this started?" "That's how all this started. Want to know a secret?" Yes, you can save the world with small acts of love too. Every time you share something of yours, you plant a seed of kindness. The child ran off to tell her friends what she had learned, and Richard watched the scene with a heart full of gratitude. That night, after the party ended, Richard asked Margaret and Emily to sit with him in the garden. "I want to share something with you," he said. "What is it, old Richard?" Emily asked. "You know my life is divided into two phases, before and after meeting you. Before I had money but no purpose. After I found my true place in the world. You transformed our lives too," Margaret said. "But there's something you don't know. All these years, I've kept a secret." Emily and Margaret grew curious. "What secret?" Richard pulled out his wallet and showed them a small, worn photo. "This is a picture from that first day when Emily offered me water. One of the workers took it without me noticing and gave it to me later." In the photo, they could see Emily, still young, handing a water bottle to Richard, who was crouched down and smiling. It was a moment of pure human connection. "I've carried this photo in my wallet for 20 years. Whenever I need to make an important decision, I look at it and ask, what would the Emily from that day do?" Margaret took the photo carefully. "What a beautiful image. It shows the exact moment two lives came together." "Three lives," Richard corrected, "because meeting Emily led me to you too, Mrs. Margaret." Emily was moved. "Old Richard, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "I want you to take a new photo, right here and now, of the three of us together, to show how that moment multiplied." Richard agreed, and they took several photos in the garden under the soft moonlight. 20 years later, the adoptive family remained united and stronger than ever. 25 years after their first meeting, Richard announced his retirement as president of Wilson & Sons Construction. Emily, now 33 and internationally recognized as a social development expert, took over as president of the Margaret Johnson Foundation. At the transition ceremony, Richard gave his final speech as the company's president. "Friends, when I took over this company, my goal was to build buildings. Today, as I retire, I realize what we've really built are bridges. Bridges between social classes, between generations, between dreams and reality." The audience applauded emotionally. "I leave the company in capable hands, but I take with me the certainty that the most important work of my life is yet to come, continuing to be Emily's adoptive grandfather and Mrs. Margaret's adoptive son." After the ceremony, the three of them walked home together. It was a tradition they had kept for 20 years. Whenever something important happened, they gathered at the house on Hope Street to talk. "Old Richard, what do you plan to do in retirement?" asked Emily. "I want to travel with you to see all the Foundation's projects, and I want to learn to cook your grandmother's recipes." Margaret laughed. "Finally, it was about time you learned to make a decent chicken broth. And I want to write a book telling our story," Richard continued, "so others will know that great transformations can start with small gestures." "What title would you give the book?" asked Emily. Richard thought for a moment. "The Water That Changed Everything. A story of love, transformation, and hope." "Perfect," said Emily, "and I want to write the foreword." Over the next year, Richard wrote the book, recounting the full story of his meeting with Emily and how it transformed not only their lives, but the lives of thousands around the world. The book became an international bestseller, inspiring business leaders, educators, and social activists in dozens of countries. All proceeds went to the Margaret Johnson Foundation, allowing the expansion of projects to Africa and Asia. 30 years after their first meeting, Margaret turned 93. Despite her advanced age, she remained sharp and continued to be the family's most respected advisor. To celebrate her birthday, the Hope Street community organized a special party. Children, young people, and adults who had benefited from the projects over the years came from across the country to honor her. During the celebration, Margaret asked to speak to the community. "My dears, turning 93 is a blessing, but the greatest blessing of my life was seeing my granddaughter grow into an extraordinary woman and gaining a son in my heart, Mr. Richard." The crowd applauded, moved. "When Emily was little, I always said, kindness multiplies. Today, I see I was right. Her kindness has multiplied into thousands of transformed lives around the world. Emily, now a mature and respected woman, approached her grandmother. "Grandma, everything I am, I owe to you. You taught me that our true wealth lies in our ability to love and serve others. And you learned well, my child." "Very well." Richard also stepped forward. "Mrs. Margaret, you gave me the family I never had. You taught me that being a man isn't about power, but about using our strength to protect and care for those we love." "The two of you are my greatest joys," said Margaret, embracing Richard and Emily. 2 years later, Margaret passed away peacefully at home, surrounded by Richard and Emily. Her last words were, "Take care of each other and keep multiplying good in the world." Margaret's funeral was an extraordinary community event. People from dozens of countries came to pay tribute to the woman who had inspired one of the greatest social transformations in Latin America. During the wake, children of all ages approached Emily with drawings and letters, all expressing gratitude for the lives they had, thanks to the project started by Grandma Margaret. After the funeral, Richard and Emily met in the garden of the house on Hope Street. "Emily, how do we move forward without your grandmother's wisdom?" "Mr. Richard, Grandma isn't gone. She lives in every value she taught us, in every person we've helped, in every child who smiles because they have hope for the future. You're right. Margaret became immortal through the love she planted in the world." A year after Margaret's passing, Richard and Emily decided to create the Margaret Johnson Institute for Social Leadership Training, dedicated to empowering young people from underserved communities to become agents of change in their own regions. The Institute's first course was held right on Hope Street, in the community hall built as part of the original project. 20 young people from different communities participated in the first class. On the first day of school, Emily addressed the group. "You're here because someone believes in your potential. My goal isn't just to teach social management techniques, but to help you discover your own talents to transform the world." One of the students raised their hand. "Ms. Emily, how did you discover your calling?" "I discovered it when I was 8 years old, offering a glass of water to someone who was thirsty. Sometimes, our greatest mission reveals itself in the simplest gestures." Over the months, Richard and Emily watched the young people grow and develop innovative projects for their communities. It was moving to see how the seed planted by Margaret continued to sprout in new generations. 5 years after the Institute's founding, over 200 young people had graduated and were leading social projects in their communities. Many of these projects had become regional and even national models. At an annual reunion of the Institute's alumni, Richard was invited to give a talk on leadership. "Young leaders, when I started my business career, I thought leadership was about having people work for you. Now, I know true leadership is about working for people." A former student asked, "Mr. Richard, what's the secret to transformative leadership?" "The secret lies in 3 words I learned from an 8-year-old girl. Share to multiply. When we share our talents, resources, and love, we multiply the positive impact in the world." 40 years after their first meeting, Richard and Emily's story had become legendary. Documentaries, academic books, and even films were made about their journey. But for them, the most important thing wasn't fame, but the real impact their projects continued to have on people's lives. Emily, now 48, had married Charles Edward, a doctor she met during a foundation project in rural Arizona. They had 2 children, John, named after his great-grandfather, and Margaret, named after her great-grandmother. Richard, now 72, was the most loving grandfather the children could ask for. He spent every afternoon with them, telling stories and teaching them about the importance of kindness and generosity. One afternoon, 6-year-old Margaret approached Richard in the garden. "Grandpa Richard, why does everyone say you and Mommy are heroes?" Richard smiled and picked her up. "We're not heroes, sweetheart. We're just people who learned that life's greatest joy is making others happy. And how do we make others happy? By sharing what we have. It could be a glass of water, a smile, a hug, or even our time. When we share with love, we multiply happiness in the world. can I be a hero too? You already are my hero, and you can be a hero to the whole world, starting with small acts of love. The little girl climbed down and ran off to play, but before she left, she turned and said, "Grandpa, tomorrow I'll bring water for the school gardener. He's always hot." Richard smiled, realizing the tradition of kindness was being passed to the fourth generation. That evening, Richard and Emily sat on the porch of their home on Hope Street, watching the activity on the road that had become a symbol of social transformation. "Emily, do you regret anything from these 40 years?" "I regret only one thing. Not recording all our conversations with Grandma. I wish my children could hear her voice telling our stories. But they know the stories through you, and you tell them with the same love and wisdom Margaret had. And you, do you regret anything?" Richard thought for a moment. "I regret taking 42 years to learn that life only makes sense when it's lived for others. But I thank God every day for finding you before it was too late." "It's never too late to change, Mr. Richard. The proof is that even today we're still transforming lives." "True. And do you know what I'm most proud of?" "What?" "Knowing that our story will continue through your children, the young people we've trained, the families we've helped. The water you offered me that day turned into an ocean of hope." 5 years later, Richard was diagnosed with a serious illness. At 77, he faced the news with the serenity of someone who had lived a full and meaningful life. During his months of treatment, he was surrounded by the love of Emily, his grandchildren, and hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by his work. In one of his last public conversations, a journalist asked Richard what his legacy would be. "My legacy isn't in the buildings I constructed or the money I earned. My legacy is in every child who has hope for the future, every young person leading social projects, every family that discovered their own power to change. And what advice would you leave for future generations? The same lesson I learned from an 8-year-old girl 45 years ago. Never underestimate the power of a small act of kindness. A shared bottle of water can change the world." Richard passed away peacefully at home, surrounded by Emily and his grandchildren. His last words were, "Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Emily. You taught me how to live." Richard's funeral was an international event. Government representatives, business leaders, social activists, and, most of all, thousands of people whose lives had been changed by his projects came to pay their respects. Emily, now 53, took full leadership of the Margaret Johnson Foundation and the Institute for Social Leadership. In her first speech as lifelong president, she said, "Richard Wilson was far more than a work partner. He was my adoptive father, my mentor, and my greatest example of personal transformation. He proved it's never too late to change, and that life has meaning when dedicated to serving others." After the funeral, Emily returned to the house on Hope Street with her children. The house felt empty for the first time in decades, yet full of precious memories. "Mom, we're going to miss Grandpa Richard," said John, now 12. "We will, my son. But he isn't completely gone. He lives in every value he taught us, every project we've built, every person we've helped." "And now, Mom, what will happen to all the projects?" asked little Margaret, now 9. "Now we carry on the work. You'll grow up knowing our mission is to make a difference in people's lives, just like Grandpa Richard did in ours." 10 years after Richard's passing, Emily had significantly expanded the Foundation's projects. Their methodology had been adopted by international organizations and was being implemented in over 50 countries. John and Margaret, now teenagers, were actively involved in the Foundation's work. John showed a talent for engineering and wanted to follow in his adoptive grandfather's footsteps, but with a focus on social housing. Margaret had a gift for education and dreamed of creating programs for underprivileged children. During a family meeting, Emily spoke with her children about the future. "Kids, you know you don't have to continue the Foundation's work if you don't want to. You can choose any career." "Mum," John replied, "Grandpa Richard taught me that our greatest joy comes from helping others. Why would I choose anything else?" "And I want to teach children just like you taught me," Margaret added. "I want them to discover they can change the world." Emily was moved to see that the 5th generation of the family had already embraced the values of love and service that Margaret had planted decades earlier. 50 years after the first meeting between Richard and Emily, Hope Street celebrated half a century of transformation. The small street had become an international symbol of sustainable community development. During the celebration, Emily, now 58 and globally recognized as one of the leading experts in social development, gave a heartfelt speech. "Friends, 50 years ago, an 8-year-old girl offered a glass of water to a thirsty worker. That simple act planted a seed that grew into a forest of hope now spreading across the entire world." The crowd of thousands applauded with emotion. Today, our community development methodology is used in 80 countries. Over 1 million families have been directly impacted by our projects, but the most important number isn't how many people we've helped, it's how many have learned to help others. John, now 22, and a civil engineering graduate, stepped up to the microphone. "I'd like to announce that our family has decided to create the Richard Wilson Perpetual Fund, which will ensure the continuation of social projects for at least 200 years. The news was met with enthusiastic cheers from the crowd. The fund had been established using resources from Richard's inheritance, royalties from the book about his story, and donations from business leaders and organizations inspired by his example. Margaret, now 19 and studying education, also spoke. "I want to announce the creation of the Seeds of Kindness program, designed for children ages 4 to 8. We'll teach them that they can change the world through small acts of love, just like my mother did 50 years ago." After the ceremony, Emily returned alone to the house on Hope Street. She sat in the garden Richard had made for her as a child and reflected on the extraordinary journey she had lived. At that moment, she remembered the words of her grandmother, Margaret. "Kindness multiplies, my dear. It always multiplies." And indeed, it had multiplied. What began as a simple gesture from a generous child had grown into a global movement for social change. Emily looked up at the starry sky and whispered, "Grandma Margaret, Mr. Richard, you did it. The seed you planted has become a forest that will never stop growing." A gentle breeze rustled the garden flowers, like a tender response from the loved ones who had passed, but remained present in every transformed life, in every child's smile, in every family that discovered their own capacity to dream. The story of love, transformation, and hope that began with a shared bottle of water had become immortal, proving that true goodness never dies. It only multiplies endlessly through hearts that choose to love. The end. So, dear listener, what did you think of this touching story? Let us know in the comments which moment moved you most and if you've ever had a similar experience. If you believe in the power of kindness to change lives, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one.